Good morning, friends. Welcome back to our fascinating discussion of Philip Larkin's poems. As if you remember, I have partially analyzed Philip Larkin's famous poem, The Whitsun Weddings. Let me recall that this is the title poem of Philip Larkin's 1964 volume, The Whitsun Weddings. This was written in 1958. But I have also read that this was basically based on this 1958 poem, which was published in 1964. It was actually based on Larkin's real life experience of a railway journey that he undertook in 1955. The precise date was August 13, 1955. I have read an article in the Financial Times that points out the biographical source of this particular poem. Now, before I actually tackle the rest of the poem in my lecture today, I would like to point out the stack of journey poems in English literature, and especially certain number of railway poems. The British love affair with the rail, with trains, started in the mid 19th century with the running of the first train from Stockton to Darlington. But what I really want to point out is the fact that poets starting with someone like, say, Robert Louis Stevenson, R.L. Stevenson, whose poem From a Railway Carriage we can very easily remember. Then Edward Thomas's poem Adelstrop is there. Stephen Spender has two poems. One is obviously the Express, another is the Pilot. Now, many poems had been written at about that time. Dealing with the train journey. Both the scenery, the changing landscape, and also the speaker's response to the changing landscape and the other thought currents that are switched on by this changing scenery. Now, I would like to caution you at the beginning of this poem, this lecture today, used caesura and enjambment, run-on lines and pauses, both physical and thematic, in his poetry. As a result, often line runs on to the next line, and even one stanza runs into another stanza. So I would like you to take cognizance of this fact. even though I had discussed the poem till the fifth stanza, I'd like to point out the fact that at the end of the fifth stanza of this poem, the sense is not adequately summed up. So the fifth stanza runs into the sixth one, and so on and so forth. So what I propose to do from today, especially today, is to read not stanza wise, but unit wise, section wise. So every syntactic unit, whether they correspond identically with or to the sentence concerned, I'm going to deal with the poem on the basis of this. So I would like Shubhasree to start at line number 48, for example. You see, one thing you have to understand that he is the Larkin persona is describing the coming on board of the newlywed couples going for their respective honeymoons, to the metropolis maybe or beyond. So from nondescript towns, these brides and bridegrooms actually get on board. Now here, the historical context of the poem needs to be remembered. I have told you in my last lecture as well that after the Second World War, there was a massive program of reconstruction whereby new and quote-unquote nondescript towns actually sprang up, in most cases by the railway track also. Now you have to understand, history has shown us how means of conveyance has attracted human habitation. We know in ancient times, civilization sprang up by the side of rivers. We may refer to a poem like The Negro Dreams of Rivers by Langston Hughes. So, from the mid-19th century onwards, because of the immense potentiality of the railway, the railroad, townships sprang up by the side of these railway tracks. There is another reason for us to point this out, the nondescript town. Now, often Larkin has been criticized by some of his detractors for a perceived or alleged note of condescension or snobbery that the middle class poet may or may not have felt for the lower and lower middle class, working class sections of the British society of his day. You see, what happens is there was a massive program of urbanization. Later on in the poem, we will come across the transformation of fields into building plots. And natural world is shown here as coexisting with and almost under the threat of the encroaching urbanization as a process. The industrial froth, the fish dock, the cooling tower, the Odeon, a string of cinema halls throughout the United Kingdom, the Pullmans, the knotted glittering rails, and all that point out even the acres of dismantled cars. They actually point out, even highlight the process of urbanization and mechanization. Okay, Shubhashree start from line 48. I may contextualize by saying that the wedding parties, wedding guests actually come to see off the bride and bridegrooms.
And as we moved, each phase seemed to define just what it saw departing.
You
Children
see, what
frowned.
happens is, wait a bit, slowly. What happens is, each one of the wedding party had the social compulsion to smile and shower good wishes, like confetti and advice thrown together. Confetti, reel of paper, which is obviously expendable, and advice which is supposed to be serious. Here he uses Larkin uses the figure of speech called jugma, whereby the verb throw actually caters to both the nouns, confetti and advice. Now, Larkin, as a poet, has shown his ironic métier by pointing out the simultaneous existence or coexistence of the mundane and the serious. Okay, so each character, each participant of the or of the wedding party seem to reflect or betray what he or she saw departing. So their relationship with the brides and bridegroom, respectively, is shown by this. Okay, go on. Children were bored because children do not understand the real significance of marriage or coupling. Go on.
Children frowned at something dull. Fathers had never known success so huge and wholly farcical.
First article. Wait a bit. So now after children, we actually come to the fathers. Now children in this case may be related to the bride and the bridegroom, for example. Fathers again, obviously, because their names are not given, fathers as category, fatherhood as a marker. has been used. So obviously they are related to the bride and bridegroom. So in a way, they have discharged their duty of marrying off their offspring. But at the same time, they cannot shut their eyes to the farcical, to the absurd, and even comical aspect of this. So, in a way, Larkin skillfully hints at the fact that the marriages, because of their common character, because there is not one marriage, there is quite a number of marriages. That take place at about this time. So, obviously, the uniqueness or seriousness associated with this concept of marriage, this event of marriage, this institution of family, this is in a way undercut by almost a dispassionate observer. Go on. After
The
farcical,
women shared the secret like a happy funeral, while girls, gripping their handbags tighter, started at a religious wounding.
stared.
Free stared, stared at a religious wounding.
Wait a bit. So here there is a categorization, a differentiation of girls and women. Women who are experienced, who may have themselves been married, mothers and aunts, and already married women, they share a secret. In a cryptic way, the speaker challenges the readers to decipher this secret. Now, happy funeral, a kind of a oxymoronic um, presentation of this. In a way, if to the cynical poet or speaker presages ultimate death and destruction and funeral, but at present it is happy. But you know, the presence of thanatotic and erotic elements in this is to be pointed out. So ultimately, these marriages will turn into kind of funeral of dreams of the bride or the bridegroom, whatever be the case. And then girls are presented here gripping their handbags tighter. These two words, gripping and tighter, have clear-cut sexual overtones. And they stare at a kind of a religious wounding. So the secret may be the reality of marriage, whereby, as Kamala Das in her poem Seven Ages of Woman has pointed out in a very succinct manner, the ultimate romantic aspect of marriage boils down to a carnal desire, lust, and the biological urge for procreation. So, in a way, this wounding of the ritual wounding of the bride after marriage. Wounding here has also the connotation of injury. So that is actually foregrounded here. Okay, go on. Free at
Free at
last.
last, and loaded with the sum of all they saw, we hurried towards London, shuffling gouts of steam.
Wait a bit.
Now fields were
No, no, stop, 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 stop. Well, free at last. Who are free at last? Maybe the couples are free at last from the curious and sometimes well tiringly solicitous attention of the relatives and friends. They actually, that means here, all these newlywed couples and the detached observer of the Larkin persona, they actually go on. Here you have to understand how certain unsaid aspects of the text are hinted at very skillfully by the poet. These, number one, the fact that there are so many couples, newly married couples, on board deprives each of the weddings of its uniqueness. They become only faces or numbers. Again, they go on, and neither is powerful enough or positioned in a way to influence the speed or direction of this journey. It's a public transport. So obviously, their coming on board this slow moving train from Lincolnshire to London points out the fact that they are all caught in this common and familiar human drama of procreation. And the train belches forth gouts of steam. Again, dates the poem. How? Because after this, the writing of this poem, if I am not terribly mistaken, in the early 1960s, most probably, the steam engines of the trains, they were discarded. So they actually joined the acres of dismantled cars. So from use, these trains will degenerate into disuse, just as the shining windscreens had degenerated into acres of dismantled cars. Okay, go on.
New fields were building plots, and poplars cast long shadows over major roads.
Stop.
And for
Stop. Now here, with the approach of the train, towards the metropolitan center of London, the nature of the scenery changes. From fields, we graduate to building plots. And the poplar trees that are very common and had been planted as part of the urban planning of the London city authorities. They actually cast shadows over major roads, not on fields. Major roads, again, like that rail line, a road is like rail lines, the roads are also important, and they were important in those days because they were facilitating the swift dispatch of goods from one place to another and services, and the to and fro visits of the high and the mighty. So in a way, this casting shadows over major roads can also mean a more sinister thing, that even these major roads are destined to decay and destruction. Go on.
and for some 50 minutes, that in time would seem just long enough to settle hats and say, I nearly died. A dozen marriages got underway.
Marriages.
They,
Marriages got underway. So
a
obviously, this
dozen,
section of the journey, this part of the journey takes say 50 minutes. And within this 50 minutes, the brides and bridegrooms actually settle down. They sit side by side and they settle their hats and become a bit easy. And the utterance of I nearly died is very interesting. It is euphemistically indicative of shock and embarrassment. This shock, this embarrassment may refer to the event of marriage, the attention shown, sometimes unwelcome attention shown by the friends and relatives and quote unquote or apparent well wishers. Now, well, this 50-minute duration, in a way, may be considered to be a very, very serious time in the life of these couples because they are sharing this experience together. Maybe many of them will never see others in their lives, but they have shared this strange journey together. Later in the poem, the speaker actually calls this a trail traveling coincident. I will go up to that presently. Okay. Uh, Read this section again.
Some 50 minutes that in time would seem just long enough to settle hats and say, I nearly died. A dozen marriages got underway.
Wait. Just think about this particular line. I wanted to highlight this. A dozen marriages got underway. They started. Now here the word dozen as used before marriages is a bit striking. Because when we use the word dozen, can anyone tell me which thing comes to your mind with dozen? I am not. I am talking about the association of the word dozen. What do you associate the word dozen with usually in real life? Oh, you don't understand. Doesn't does not mean that. You go and read your look it up in the dictionary. Dozen usually means 12 in number. Dozen, what does the word dozen get associated with? With eggs. You know, again that by the dozen, these marriages by the dozen means that these marriages are not very unique. And these places, the word as used here, places the newlywed couples in within a common bracket en masse. Okay. And the association of eggs, because Larkin is a very subtle poet. Eggs are associated with procreation and with fertility. Egg can mean a food item. It can also refer to hatching and chicks coming out of them, giving birth to the next generation. So Larkin very skillfully demystifies the concept of marriage and links it to the biological necessity of procreation. And from the individual, the individual couples, for example, the focus shifts to a collective level. Okay, go on.
They watched the landscape, sitting side by side. An Odeon went past, a cooling tower, and something running up to bowl,
And
and someone running up to bowl.
wait. Now earlier, these newly married couples were the watched. They were the objects of the speaker's gaze. Now they are the watchers. They have become watchers because now they are not outside the train but inside a speeding train and looking out on the changing scenery. And what do they say? These newly married couples sitting side by side, a bride sitting side by side by the side of her husband, her bridegroom, and so on and so forth. So, what do they see? Again, an Odeon. Odeon is actually like, like Big Bazaar. You know, Odeon is just as Big Bazaar is a chain of supermarkets. Similarly, Odeon was a chain of cinema halls that sprouted throughout the United Kingdom. In a way, this reference to the cinema hall can be a reference to the idealized picture of British and American films. The idealized images and representations of marriage and love in British and American films. Then a cooling tower. It's a phallic symbol. And someone running up to bowl. These are all running by in a way. These are transitory images and vignettes, In this context, I will refer you back to a poem like Robert Louis Stevenson's From a Railway Carriage. Here, along with the theme of transitoriness, transience, the relentless passage of time is highlighted. Along with that is highlighted the theme of movement. If in a poem like Ode on a Grecian Urn by Keats, the stanza form of which and the basic theme of which is borrowed from and deviated from by Philip Larkin in this poem, if the Grecian urn represented a marmoreal stasis, the stasis of art, here, this strange journey, this poem signifies movement, relentless, unceasing movement. Okay, go on.
And none thought of the others they would never meet, or how their lives would all contain this hour.
So here, these couples are so engrossed in their mutual existence, one in another, that they do not understand the real significance of this collective traveling form of public transport. Their lives will contain this hour, this experience. But most of them will never set eyes on others of this crowd. Okay, go on.
I thought of London spread out in the sun, its postal districts packed like squares of wheat.
Wait a minute.
They,
Now here I, that means the Larkin persona, the speaker of the poem, now thinks about visualizes London from a bird's eye view. London divided into postal districts, each of them having their separate and distinct postal codes, and they were packed full of inhabitants, residents. Now here, Larkin very skillfully refers to an agricultural reality. Square of wheat, wheat being one of the oldest crops of humanity, can ensymbol fertility again. So in a way, these marriages began so commonly and auspiciously during this particular train journey, will have the potentiality of breeding new human beings, of continuing the human line. Okay, go on.
There were there we were aimed, and as we raced across bright notes of rail, past standing pullmans, walls of blackened moss came close, and as it was nearly done, this frail travelling coincidence.
Stop. So they were all aimed at particular destinations. Each one had particular destinations and also particular destinies. On the physical level, they were all going to particular places, and on the metaphysical level, their lives had a particular direction and a particular course to run, that is destiny. So they were all aimed, and what they passed through standing pullmans, that means railway compartment carriages built by the manufactured by the Pullman company, bright knots of rail, complicated arrangement of railway tracks. But here, the word knot can also hint at the possible complications that these marriages will all have to encounter, to face. Understood? And obviously, slowly but surely, the station building comes close. Just as they near the end of their journey, their destination, final destination, London. Walls blackened with moss, again, this moss may be indicative of age, decay, and neglect. And it is blackened, presumably, by the soot from the engines of the passing trains. But in a way, these walls also signify some kind of stability. Their journey is nearly done. And this frail means fragile, frail means wicked, traveling coincident. Now here, coincident is variously interpreted by people, either as something supernatural and serious and of immense import, or as a blind manifestation of chance and fate. So the fact that these newly married couples, as observed by the detached Larkin persona, all shared this train journey with one another, can be part of a very, very significant design. It can also be just incidental. And Larkin's greatness as a post-war British poet rests on the fact that he can give us open-ended statements. These poems are very, very suggestive and symbolic, and they are amenable to multiple interpretations. Okay, go on. After traveling coincident. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Subhasri, can you hear me?
স্যার শোনা যাচ্ছিল না ঠিক করে, এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে।
Well, go on. Was my explanation audible?
Yes, sir.
স্যার, you are not clearly audible.
No, the others, you may have not, you may have experienced a network issue. What about the others?
Sir, clear
It's
ছিল।
audible, sir.
Okay, then Subhasri, go on. After this frail traveling coincident. Yes, Subhasri. It seems Subhasri is having certain problems. Well, Vikram, read out the rest of the poem. Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, I'm
Why don't you
presenting,
read it?
so it is quite.
Okay, somebody else, maybe Shamim. Oh God.
Sir, I'm reading.
Okay, read.
Okay, sir. What it held stood ready to be loosed with all the power that being changed can give.
So what it held, this traveling coincidence, held the power of change. There is a power in movement. There is a power in being changed, in being able to change. You know, the landscape changed, and the experience of this shared train journey must have changed the couples. Okay, go on.
Yes, sir. We slowed again, and as the tightened brakes took hold, there
Wait a
swelled a
minute.
sense of
Wait a
falling,
minute. Wait a minute. Wait a
like
minute.
an arrow.
Now, ultimately, the train slowed down. Before stopping at the Great London station, maybe, it slowed down. Obviously, the tauten brakes took hold, and there was a sense of falling. Again, so the movement changes from horizontal to vertical. Okay. So there is an element of bathos. From the collective, they will all degenerate into their individual pairs. So, okay, sense of falling, but there is also, if you recall the word aim, there is also the implication of rainfall, of fertility, of procreation. Okay, go on.
Like an arrow shower sent out of sight, somewhere becoming rain.
Okay, so here this simile brings in two things. Number one, there is an allusion to classical mythology of Cupid, you know, Cupid's arrows. When they strike
Yes,
people, they fall in love with one another, each other, you know, a pair of arrows. Here, there are arrows, arrow showers. So, shower of arrows. So, not individually one pair, but many pairs are affected by these arrows of Cupid, maybe. But Larkin even undercuts that mythical allusion by pointing out that they are sent out of sight. We don't know what these presumably are going to do. Will they fall in love or will they fall out of love? As the reality of marriage sinks in afterwards, what will happen? We are not sure. But somewhere it may become rain, give sustenance to human civilization and the continuance of the bloodlines, humanity. So, in a way, this poem, besides being a journey poem, is in a way an intertextual throwback at Keats's Ode on a Grecian Art. Today, I have provided you with materials to this effect. You know, just as Larkin used in the Whitsun weddings the same stanza form of Keats, 10 line stanzas rhyming ABAB, CDE, CDE. In a way, a quatrain followed by a sestet. Larkin actually, in one of his interviews, had referred to his dates too, as well as deviations from Keats. He had somewhere written, as a rejoinder to Keats's comment, beauty is truth, truth, beauty. That is all in know on earth and all that you need to know. Now, Larkin has written somewhere, beauty is beauty and truth, truth. That is not all you know on earth and not all you need to know. So, just as the stasis of art is counterpointed in this poem with the movement of life, just as the permanence of artistic representation is debunked by the transience of poetical limning. There is also some kind of a formal and technical reappraisal of Keats's odes in and through the lines and stanzas of this particular poem. So with this, I come to the end of my reading of Larkin's poem, The Whitsun Weddings. If you have any queries, relevant ones, you may ask them.
Sir,
Okay, please ask.
sir, is this poem a one-dimensional poem? I mean, uh, there may be multi interpretation of this poem, and
Obviously, any poem worth its name must be amenable to different kinds of interpretations. Now, you think about the themes. It can be read as a journey poem, it can be read as a post-Christian poem, it can be read as a post-Second World War poem. Similarly, the themes are different. There is movement, there is transience, there is the juxtaposition of the mundane with the serious. So all these things, even there is the expectation of life with the certainty of death and decay. So obviously, it is not a one-dimensional poem by any stretch of our imagination.
so as the title is connected to wedding, so the major theme must be related to marriage, I guess. Uh, but still, we find that there is a conflicting coexistence of rurality and urbanity. So, should we look at the marriage theme more importantly, or at the conflicting coexistence of rurality or and urbanity, sir?
No, you are not actually being able to understand the poem, it seems. You know, the question shows, see, Whitsun weddings are obviously referred to here. But we are actually being party to, as readers, and even the Larkin persona is observing not the marriage itself, but its effect. The marriage is over, and the pair is going for their honeymoon. The Whitsun weddings, in this, you have to understand that in those days, as I have pointed out, there were certain clear-cut advantages to for these Whitsun marriages because of the holiday in the following Mondays, the bank holiday. The weekend had to be could be stretched, and no additional leave had to be taken from the tenuous employment situation. You have to understand this. And there were tax breaks. If you wanted to hold receptions, there were tax breaks whereby you could actually curtail your expenditure. And because it is a journey poem, because it is describing what, yes, the Whitsun weddings give to the poet speaker some kind of an incentive Just as The Solitary Reaper is a poem that got its fillip, that got its incentive from the beautiful, lovely, and very pleasant song, the melody of the song of the Reaper Girl. Similarly, so the newly wed couples from the Whitsun weddings give to the poet an occasion to write the poem. But because this journey is on a physical level, a journey, a train journey from Hull in Lincolnshire to Oxford, to London. So obviously, it is a historical fact that the rural background is, the landscape is changed into an urban one. Understood? But I am trying to point out one very, very important fact, that pristine nature is not described. Nature never touched by man's artifice is not mentioned in this poem. So when we talk about the river, we are also made aware of the fact that we are on a speeding train. When we talk about canals, we cannot totally ignore, say, the industrial froth. Okay? So the rural and the urban coexist with an emphasis on the historical fact that urbanization was going on a big scale after the Second World War. That is the temporal setting of the poem. Yes? Any other question? Okay, if there are no other questions, I will sign off here. I'll request Shamim Siddiq to remove
Sir,
me from the.
sir, মেহরুন
Yes?
স্যার মেহরুন স্যার একটা কোশ্চেন করেছে স্যার here the symbol of marriage is only fertility or any allegorical aspects of it.
You see, the question, though relevant, is not put in a grammatical manner. Yes, there are allegorical aspects of marriage. But the biological and sociological fact of procreation and fertility cannot be ignored. There is love, there is togetherness, companionship that marriage provides for the bride and the bridegroom. But the necessity of procreation cannot be totally ignored. Okay? And that is why I am telling you, you have to understand that Larkin was basically a kind of a cynical poet in most of his poems. But there is also an element of faith in humanity. Despite all the mundane matters. Despite all the degeneration that the Second World War had wrought. Okay? So that is also there.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Okay, tomorrow on Friday, I will deal with add grass. And the class will begin at 9 a.m. Okay? Shamim, you may remove me.
Okay, sir. ভালো থাকবেন।